Yep. Okay, we're live, Chair. Okay. Thank you for everybody to attend today's meeting. I'll just crack on straight away with apologies. The only apologies I've received is Andy Wright. He's been substituted by Councillor Bell. Councillor Wright has actually done himself an injury that's not a very pleasant one to keep him sitting in a chair for too long. He's busted his ribs. So we wish him well. And like I say, Councillor Bell is, I can't actually see if she's on. Is she on? Is Councillor Bell?
Yeah, I'm here, Claire.
Oh, there you are. Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
No camera on, but I'm here.
Okay. As with previous meetings, I seem to have a delayed reaction on who's in and probably whose hands go up, so we might have to make that clear verbally as well. I will check though. Oh, hang on, my postman's just turned up. Oh dear. Can I ask if there are any disclosures of pecuniary? Yeah, thanks. Disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest. I'm really sorry about that. Other than what's written. I'm not seeing any hands, and I'm not being verbally made aware of anything, so I'll take that as a no. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, which is Chair's announcements, and that falls to me. There is an announcement that I would like to make, and this is in relation to the Bermuda Bridge project. There is a briefing note that I have in my possession that will be shared at the end of this meeting, and I will just briefly share my screen for 1 second so you can all have a quick look. Doesn't appear to be there. So this is a briefing note that you will all be distributed, well, it will be distributed to everybody after this meeting, and it's an update on the Bermuda Connectivity Project. The only thing I would like to highlight is this section here, which is incorrect, and unfortunately Scott is the author of this. He's not actually available at the moment, he's on holiday, so I've not been able to get it updated, so I am going to show this with the incorrect item. Basically, the pedestrian crossing is not going to be on Heath End Road, it will be on Bermuda Road, a location to be decided. So as I can scroll down this now, there's a lot of information that is from the previous cabinet meeting. There's not really been much happened other than a few instances of changes, like I said, the pedestrian crossing. So I will share that. Also, at the chair and spokes meeting, the last chair and spokes meeting we had, it was decided that this would come back as a full agenda item. I mean, the Bermuda project. That still stands. So there will be a full agenda item and time for discussion at a later meeting for this project. I'm not anticipating discussion on this today. This is just a briefing note that will be passed out, and it's for update only, really. So I am then going to move on now to the minutes of the previous meeting. Don't know what that was. Minutes of the previous meeting. Has anybody got any queries about the minutes?
Chair, Councillor Condical has his hand up.
Okay. Councillor Condical?
Councillor Dolby, I wanted to discuss your announcement, and in it also included provision of the cycle route that had been taken out. So
Councillor Condical, the chair's announcement is not for discussion.
Chair's
announcement is the chair's announcement.
My question was, Councillor Golby, are you going to share that to the members so we can discuss it in AOB or the work programme, please?
No, as I've discussed, the briefing note will be shared after the meeting, and it's not for discussion at this meeting. We do have it coming back as a full agenda item at a meeting in the future, as we agreed at the chair and spokes that we all attended last time. I'm happy to discuss the potential of the coming back as a full agenda item at the next chair and spokes. We'll pin a date down, but we have already agreed that it will be a full agenda item. So there's no discussion on the briefing note today. It will be distributed after the meeting, as I discussed.
Councillor Golby, we had an agreement between me and the portfolio holder that we would publish a briefing note at this meeting, so that it was clear that we were going to include the cycle route as a separate.
Councillor Condicore, you made no such agreement with me as the chair of this meeting. In fact, I found out about this briefing note through a back door. So you can make as many agreements with as many people as you like, but unless you make them with me as the chair, I've made my announcement, and that's what it says. That's how it stands. It can be picked up after the meeting when the briefing note goes out.
Is the briefing note going to be published, Chair?
Briefing note will be distributed after the meeting.
We're not put in the public domain.
The briefing note will be distributed after the meeting, Councillor Condicore, and that is all I'm willing to say on the matter. We are now going to move on. Has anybody got any issues with the meeting minutes from the previous meeting? Is everybody happy that I signed them off as a true and correct record? Anyone? Speak now.
Yeah, happy with that.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is public speaking. I'm not aware of any public speakers. Has that actually changed, Isabel, or are we still no public speakers?
Yeah, there's still no public speakers, Chair.
Thank you. The next agenda item will be questions to portfolio holders. Now, I believe Councillor Fradgley submitted a question in writing, so I would like to hand that straight over to Councillor Timms. I believe you're going to respond. Would you like to read the question out first, Councillor Fradgley?
Just finding it. Sorry, I just.
Oh, it's okay.
It's on my phone. Oh, here we are. I understand the structure WCC has to measure and monitor carbon emissions. It comes in Scope 1, the estate, Scope 2, energy use, Scope 3, services, e.g. waste, and Scope 4, wider Warwickshire. I'd just like to have an update on the process of measuring accurately and the steps being taken to reduce CO2 output and the evidence that it's being driven down. Basically, where can we get hold of this data as it comes forward to see the direction and the trend?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Fradgley. I'm a little confused by it because you actually sit on the cross-party climate change group, and we do have another meeting on the 10th of March where you will get a fuller update than perhaps asking a question at this meeting. You know that we're committed to our council plan and our recovery plan to real action on climate change, and we remain focused on and progressing towards our ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030. That's regarding direct carbon emissions in the scopes 1 and 2. Between 2013 and 2018, we reduced our direct carbon emissions by over 50%. This is informed by information gathered using our environmental management system.
Heather, can you put your microphone down?
Oh, is it not?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, that's better.
Right, better now.
Okay. The carbon emissions are measured by information which we gathered with our environmental management system. That's ISO 14001 accredited. So it is an accredited system that's been reported recently through to Cabinet. We obviously closely monitor our corporate energy, and we have accurate information for scopes 1 and 2, which shows a reduction, as I said, of over 50% between 2013 and 2018. Scope 3, we are working to see how we can get more accurate information, and how improvements can be made. Particularly, there's a new procurement strategy coming forward, so that will help that work. This month, you know that we launched the £1 million Green Shoots Community Climate Action Grant Scheme. That's all about mitigating the impact of climate change. This week, we launched our Solar Together initiative, which helps homeowners across the county to easily buy solar panels to produce green energy for their homes. With central government funding, we are developing innovative proposals to reduce the carbon impact on our corporate estate so that we can lead the way towards a low carbon future. We have already secured a low carbon skills fund grant from the government, and that's going to carry out building surveys to inform the projects to decarbonise our buildings. And we have also been successful with a further bid to do more work to survey the rest of the estate. So this work is going to underpin a complete decarbonisation programme, which we will use to bid for future funding. So really working hard on the decarbonation of our estate. So there's lots of work also going on with the districts and borough councils. We have agreed a common method for baselining our carbon footprint, from which obviously further carbon neutrality planning will flow. In particular on this item, we will coordinate the work across the councils with regard to tree planting and the link in biodiversity and joining up green corridors across the county. As I said, there will be a really full update at the next meeting of the Climate Change Cross-Party Group, which is on the 10th of March.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I'll just move on to any other questions to any other portfolio holders. Councillor Condicourt.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions, one for Councillor Clark on the Bermuda Bridge project and one for probably Councillor Crump on 2020s by schools. First, Councillor Clark, you'll be aware that the Bermuda Bridge project was approved in principle at Cabinet as far as the contract was concerned, and after that we had a call-in which we filed legally to the officers. The officers actually came back to us and said it would be easier if we didn't call it in because of it would delay the contract, and offered to provide the cycle route for 450 metres via a separate funding application to the investment pot, the SIF funding. Can you confirm, Jeff, that we did actually agree that and agree that you would actually publish a note to actually make it clear that this was going to be put as a bid? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to confirm, actually. I responded to your email on Friday the 5th of February, in which I confirmed that I would support a bid going forward. That's following discussions with the chair, Councillor Golby, who is the ward member, actually, to ensure that as much as the scheme as could be completed, will be completed. So I am confirming that I'm happy to support that bid.
And you're happy, Councillor Clark, to publish that briefing note that we've had flashed before us?
That's
Can I just interject on?
Sorry,
Can
Chair.
I just interject? The fact that I put it on screen, it's published. That isn't. We don't need to answer that question because I've just published it.
Claire, I think
You will all get a copy after the meeting.
I think that's answered the question, Keith.
Any further questions?
I was also going to ask about the 2020 outside schools, because one thing I did like in the budget proposals was actually we're now going to think about moving forward with 21-hour zones outside schools. So I wanted to ask how we get this moving quickly as possible. Thank you.
Councillor Crump, do you want to jump in on that?
I think it's a bit, again, a joint effort between Councillor Clark and myself. I don't know whether moving quickly is the right phrase, Councillor Conlock, or in terms of 20 miles an hour. But I think it's a combination of the two, really, between myself and Councillor Clark. Obviously, the Safer in Warwickshire initiative, where we've got the two workers part funded by the DFT, they will work to try and get sustainable transport access to schools, and I think it'll be part of the process and gathering all the evidence as well. So, like Councillor Clark, we like to make these decisions on evidence based and putting them in the appropriate locations, and I think to be time limited as well. I think that's one of the key ones, that between say 8:15 and 9:15 and 3 o'clock or 2:45 and 4:15, something like that. So there's got a lot of work to be done. Yeah, I fully support this, because any accident on our roads, particularly by schools, is not acceptable. So yeah, we definitely will be working on this, but again, based on the evidence and based on the information we get from the residents, because the residents are involved as well, and the pupils, and obviously the schools as well. In some of my schools, because of the congestion, they can't get any faster. They don't do 20 mile an hour in the morning in Welsh Road West, St James's Road, where we've got a secondary school and a primary school in Southam. But I accept your point, Councillor Condacor, and it's top of our top priorities between myself and Councillor Clark.
If I may, Chair, can I just clarify, we will be able to put forward schools after the election period, because my residents have been asking for many years, like at Wellington School. So I do hope the 2020 is going to be something that starts after May. Is that correct?
New financial year, please.
Yes, that's absolutely the purpose of a budget. Thank you.
As I say, it's a new financial year, so yeah, not a problem.
Dave, I can see your hand is up. Was it something to add on to this?
Yes, actually, yeah, it was just we are, the officers are looking to put together a capital investment fund bid on the timed advisory 2020 21-hour zones. So that's something that we are progressing and will bring forward in the new financial year. So yeah, just to confirm, it's, as Andy and Jeff have said, it's a key priority and a work in progress.
Okay, thank you. Dave Shilton, your hand is
Thank you,
raised.
Claire. I've been trying to get the hand to go up.
Sorry.
It's just happened. Claire, just to say about the good news for this area is that it was announced last night on television quite broadly regarding the Jag Land Rover site, Baggington. And I think that's great news. Carbon issues, which is a battery factory to all battery cars. And I think that's wonderful news for us. I know Coventry is starting to steal the thrust of it, but it's Warwickshire that more or less is in up there, I believe. I used to represent that ward. And I think we should be singing about it. It's damn good news for us, for employment and, again, for the green economy later on in life. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I've got Izzy and Peter. Izzy, do you want to come in first?
So we've had some very good news this week on two counts. Firstly, JLR announcing that they will be going totally electric by 2030. So that is, a direction of travel, which is a huge shift for that company and most welcome. And of course, the Gigafactory, which Dave has absolutely alerted everyone to, is another important and very key part of that journey. So both of these will see a real shift in the types of jobs and the new jobs that will be coming forward. Baggington Airport, the entrance to it is in Coventry, but the airport is in Warwickshire. So we're clearly very pleased to have this new Gigafactory, national centre in Warwickshire. It's great news, and clearly we will be getting the business rates for it. So they obviously benefits on both fronts. So thank you, Dave. It is really exciting news and some fantastic, innovative and 21st century jobs that will be coming into our area.
Peter?
Yeah, just to point out about the 20 mile an hour. So we plumb for in the budget for advisory 20 mile an hour speed limits for the very reason it speeds up the process of getting them in place. So speed was of the essence when we kind of decided to take that view. based on the fact that most people do adhere to 20 mile an hour speed limits when they are put up. So, speed was part of the decision-making process and also reduction in cost. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Keith, your hand is up again. Is that an old hand or is
No,
it?
it's a new hand because we discussed the new battery factory. I don't know if the cabinet members know if there's actually a signed up car manufacturer or someone to use this battery factory if it happens. It's not certain. And if it can also go to the wider battery supply for transport, because we've got the vehicle pods in Coventry, we've got buses, so we keep thinking car batteries, but if we haven't got an end user for the gigafactory, we could actually broaden it to some of the things that aren't covered by the car manufacturers, if you know what I mean. So I wanted some certainty on how certain it was, and also if it can be broadened to all batteries for transport, not just cars.
To come back on that, I think those conversations are going to be confidential at this point in time, and clearly they're not going to be discussed at a public meeting in Warwickshire. It is worth saying that it was very clearly stated that it talks about a 3 to 4 year programme of development. So, it isn't going to be instantly in operation in a year's time.
Thanks, Izzy. Dave Shilton, I can see your hand up again. Is that a new one or an old one?
It's a new one, and it's a new question. Just to say thank you to everyone who was involved in a question I asked early on, I think at one of the meetings, regarding the gritting situation for the Warwickshire vaccination centre, League One. Can I say how successful that has been? I was there myself having the injections, and in fact, the little trolley come around from the golf club, and he got a little spreader behind him, and there he was, and the road was as clear as a bell. So congratulations to Warwickshire and to our team and Jeff's team, who's in charge of that, I believe, for all the work that they've done. Well done.
Thanks, Dave. Jeff, your hand's gone up.
Just to say thank you for that acknowledgement, and I'll pass on your good wishes and thank yous to the staff involved. They've done an absolutely fantastic season so far this year. They have been out around 50 times, I believe, and will continue to monitor the networks as required up through March as well. So thank you for that, Councillor Shilton, and I'll pass on your thanks to the staff who have done an absolutely fantastic job again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. We'll move on to the economic development updates. Dave, I think you're Dave Hill. There's too many Daves. I think you're going to answer any questions that arise. Have you got? I'm not aware of any sort of presentation that you've got to give at this moment in time. But has anybody got any questions for Dave on any economic update issues? Okay, I can see Keith, your hand has gone up, but I'm not seeing anybody else's. So if there is anybody else, can you shout? Keith?
Thank you for such a wonderfully detailed list of stuff. This list gets bigger and bigger all the time. One thing I'm a bit concerned on here was it mentioned Norton. I searched Norton motorcycles, and I think they're having some difficulties with Brexit, etc. So is that now resolved or not? Thank you, Chair.
Dave, would you like?
I mean, I don't know the details of Norton's business model. I know they have been looking at investments, and this is part of their investment plan going forward. Like any manufacturer, I'm sure they are working through the implications of Brexit, but the investment is a positive sign in these times. So, yeah, I don't have any other news on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands going up.
Yeah, might I ask a question?
John, yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't find the hand on the menu.
Just wave at me, John, I'll see you.
No, it's about the towns update and town centres, because clearly that's going to be extremely important. with town centre retailing having taken such a hit. But we also have another issue, well, many issues in the town centre, and I'm not sure if air quality comes in this or a later agenda item, but we have had an air quality management zone order in place on Leamington and Warwick town centres for 20 years now, and it really is about time that we got on with sorting it out. And I've got a air quality sensor here, which is on loan from Public Health, and I've got plenty of experience now of what the air quality problems are, which are all traffic. Warwick, we have a town centre traffic plan which is proceeding very slowly and actually was designed to bring the air quality within acceptable limits. And Leamington are working on this at the moment, I know. But if we're going to have, well, we are determined to have town centre recovery and get back to where we were. But the air quality issue really does have to be sorted as a matter of top priority now.
Dave, is this falling into your remit again, or?
To a certain degree,
It straddles a few things, doesn't
it straddles a number of areas, and also there is wider work, which I think a future report is coming to overview scrutiny around air quality monitors, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, absolutely, future town centres requires a more holistic approach to look at the economic, the social, but also the environmental, and air quality is a key part of that. Obviously, we need to get our town centres up and running and being economically active again, which is important, but we need to do that in as green and environmentally sustainable way as possible. And looking to ensure we're putting in the right transport plans to promote active travel. So, yeah, it's a big, complicated picture, and what we're trying to weave it all together. And our future Towns Commission that we're talking about, which is kind of looking at the long-term plan, will certainly have a very strong focus on that whole element of air quality, active travel, and how you look to remove traffic from town centres, because that will be critical. But it's a very complicated and nuanced scenario, isn't it? As we know, as we discovered through our road space reallocation work, whereas some people will want to see traffic out of towns, other people see traffic in towns as a key part of driving the economy. So, I mean, lots of things that we're thinking about the last mile delivery and how that could work in town centres to help take traffic out of those town centres, along with the transport plans that John has spoken about in terms of what we're looking to do in Warwick town centre, and also what we're looking to do in Leamington and the corridor in between through Endscript Road. So, yeah, I mean, lots going on. Yes, top key priority for us to tackle that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, clearly it's not a straightforward problem, or it would have been solved by now. But the hit that town centre retailing has been so severe, and of course there has to be a balance. You can't run a pub without a beer lorry. But an air quality management zone order must have some legal force. And the order on Leamington and Warwick has been in force for 20 years now. We have plans, and perhaps our plans don't go far enough. And it is a compromise, and but I believe it can be done, that we can have thriving town centres with air quality within the acceptable safe limit. And we just need to get on with it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Andy Jens, I can see your hand is up. Where are you? I can't see you on the screen now. There you are.
Well, I'm here. I'm just having trouble with my buttons. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say that I always find this report really useful and really interesting. Just one comment, just reading through it and looking particularly at the paragraph on digital training programs for retailers. I sometimes think it could be useful if we had a bit more information about the spread of the sort of help that's been given. So we mentioned 62 businesses, but what is the range of the type of businesses, the sort of size of those businesses, and the geographic spread of those businesses? So is it possible to get that sort of information as well? Thank you.
Just very quickly, yes, absolutely. We're putting together actually right at the moment a kind of an infographic that pulls together all the sort of economic recovery programs we've done over the past was it 10 months now, 11 months, which will break that down in terms of the types of support, locations, the types of business, and some case studies. So yes, all that information is there. We're putting it together, and if we'll share, I think it's very, very soon to be completed. But then if there's any further questions on that, we can provide further, more detailed breakdown. But hopefully that will answer those questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Keith, your hand is up again. Is that a new one?
Thank you, Chair. It's a new one. Just coming back on Dave Aiton-Hill's comments about sustainable transport into the town centres. You've got the Vicarage Street project on there, and we've had an exciting new diagram of the project released earlier this week. And there's not a single cycle or single cycle route on the Vicarage Street project glosses. And it looks like it'll be an anti-cycling area again. Can you ask if that's going to be corrected so actually we can see how cyclists are going to enter the Vicarage Street development site and cross it? Because we say all these fine words, but then when we see the diagram, there's no cycling around the ring road other than shared use, and there's no cycling into the Vicarage Street site, and that needs addressing. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was our indicative master plan that Keith's talking to. It sets out a high level ambition. There are a number of changes on that already in terms of what might be going there, and it's all subject to change. But yeah, this is the high level picture of what we're aiming to bring forward. As we move forward into detailed design, that will clearly bring together much more detail, but also bring together those details of how active travel within and through Nuneaton Town Centre will be addressed. It's clearly, again, as I mentioned, a key priority, but we focus on active travel within our town centres, and Nuneaton, Transforming Nuneaton programme will have a strong active travel component to it, and certainly Vicarage Street Master Plan will integrate cycling within that design as we move forward to that detailed level.
Thanks. So I can see Jeff Clark and Dave Shilton with their hands. So Jeff, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. If I may, just to answer Councillor Holland, obviously air quality is of great importance to us all going forward. It will be part of the local transport plans as we move forward, and we are liaising with all our partner members in discussions to ensure that as we develop the local transport plan, those areas and the opportunity to help regenerate the town centres is maximised as well. So that is an aspect that we're looking at in there. In relation to the second point, that, if I may just Chair, that Keith raised, as Dave Aiton-Hill's just raised, it's a concept plan at the moment. There is every opportunity to ensure that there is cycle access into the town centre. In actual fact, you may be aware we've just introduced a new scheme on the Longshoot yesterday, where we're consulting with the public at the present time with a 1.3 kilometre scheme, which will link up with a Hinkley Road scheme that's under development as well. So there are intentions to get cycles into and out of the towns as best we can. So just to reassure the members, that's something that we are doing. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jeff. Dave Shilton, can see your hand again.
Chair, I think that people are not reading the papers, because in 3.2 on page 20 and 21, Transforming Nuneaton, page 21, Leamington Spa, and it's all about the transformation of these town centres. Leamington Spa's got 10 million going in, and other areas have as well. And this is being well looked at by the officers, and I'm sure it will cover most of these aspects which we're questioning at this present moment. There it is in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Dave. I can't see any more hands up, so.
Yeah, can I reply to that last point? I have very carefully read the papers and am fully aware of where Leamington are at. And that is the reason that I raised the point. I mean, clearly our officers have done a great deal of work on preparing these documents and are well aware of the issues. But the fact is, the Air Quality Management Zone Order has been in place for 20 years, and it's only the County Council that can comply with it, because the problem is traffic. We are the highway authority. And, my point still stands. Having read the papers very carefully, I would like to emphasise the air quality as an important part of a recovery of town centre retailing, which, I'm sure we're all signed up to. Don't think any of that's controversial.
Thanks, John. So I can't see anybody else indicating, and I'm minding to move on to agenda item 4 now, which is the workplace travel planning intervention, and we have Dr. Paul Coleman to present. Can't see. There you go. So
Hi.
I'll just introduce Dr. Coleman. He is Public Health Registrar and Honorary Research Fellow at the University of Warwick, so eminently qualified to discuss what we're going to discuss. If I can hand over to you now. Thank you, Paul.
Great, thank you, Councillor Golby. Yeah, really fascinating to listen to your discussion. Lots of interesting things going on. So I want to talk to you about some work that I was involved in, also with Nadia Inglis in the public health team, who I know is on the meeting as well, around using personal air pollution monitors and seeing how they can be used to influence travel behaviour. I'm glad to see that Councillor Holland was holding up one of our air pollution monitors earlier, so you all got to see what they look like. There we go. So I have a brief presentation that I was going to start off with, about 10 minutes, and then we had some recommendations and time for questions. So I'll go into the presentation, but if anyone has any questions as I'm going along, feel free to interrupt me if you want me to clarify anything. So hopefully I'm sharing my screen with you all. So yes, this is about some work that we've done exploring how air pollution monitors can be used to influence travel behaviour. So this was a project that involved recruiting council staff to take part over about a year. So a quick overview. So I'm just going to tell you, touch on air pollution and commuting behaviour around Warwickshire, but listening to the conversation, it sounds like you all know far more than I do about local levels of air pollution and travel behaviour. And I'm going to talk about the intervention that we developed, look at some results, a bit of a summary, and then some recommendations. So very quickly, so we know that air pollution is obviously one of the leading causes of mortality. So DEFRA says that air pollution is the leading environmental cause of death in the UK, with about 28,000 to 36,000 deaths a year. And this is from things such as cardiovascular, respiratory diseases, cancer, pregnancy complications, and impeded cognitive development. So I know you all recognise what a serious threat it is. Looking at data for Warwickshire, this is just PHE data. So this is modelled data, which there are issues with. But roughly, air pollution across Warwickshire is fairly similar to England averages. So I just have particulate matter data here. But for other pollutants, it's similar, although you do obviously get those spikes in town centres, which I think masks this overall average level that we have here. And again, PHE estimates say across the whole of Warwickshire, air pollution brings forward around 1,500 premature deaths per decade. But obviously on top of these deaths, you get lots of increased morbidity and illnesses. So this is just our most severe endpoint. And one thing that we know for both Warwickshire and the whole of the UK is that people are exposed to those highest levels of air pollution when they're commuting to and from work, particularly in smaller towns, where once you get into the town, you get those bottlenecks of air pollution. So I just want to quickly touch on commuting behaviour around Warwickshire. We know across Warwickshire, a higher than average number of people tend to commute to work by car. I have a table here which is just Warwick data, but other towns in Warwickshire are similar. So we have around 29,000 people commuting by car out of a total of 34,000. And then if you start to look at the type of behaviour that we want, the walking and cycling, is just a very, very small handful of people walk and cycle to work. And yeah, this is similar across the whole of the UK. Obviously, not a unique problem that Warwick faces. But unfortunately, we've seen over the last decade an increase in car journeys, and particularly shorter journeys. And in fact, around 60% of journeys in the UK are under 5 miles in distance. This is obviously bad from a public health perspective, and it's these short journeys that contribute most to air pollution. And the reason I mention this is because this is the focus of the work that we did. It was these short journeys up to 5 miles to places of work in Warwickshire. So I'm just going to talk about exactly what the intervention is that we developed. So we did this in collaboration with some academics at Coventry University and also the University of Birmingham. And the main aim here was to determine whether people who commute to work by car change their primary mode of travel to walking and cycling following the delivery of a workplace travel planning intervention. So a bit of a mouthful there, so I'll say exactly what this intervention was. So this is what we did. So we recruited 30 participants. These were all people that worked either at Warwickshire County Council or Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council. So 30 people in total. So we talk about a small number here. So this isn't a big scale study, but it gives us a real insight into what's happening in Warwickshire. So we recruit our participants. The first thing we did was get them all to complete the baseline questionnaire, and this was to tell us about their current travel behaviour. So we focused on how do you travel to work, what's your most frequent mode of transport, and what are your main reasons for not walking and cycling. So that's the first thing we did. We then had our air pollution monitors. So we gave each participant an air pollution monitor for a 2-week period to use on their commute to and from work. Some councillors actually involved in the meeting today work with some of our participants, they'll know all about this. But the air pollution monitors give you live GPS data linked to your phone and show you where your highest and lowest levels of pollution are on your commute to and from work. So we gave the monitors to everyone for 2 weeks. At the end of that 2 weeks, we did one-to-one travel planning sessions with all participants. So we sat down with them face-to-face, we looked at their journey to work, and then we looked at how they could either walk or cycle and what alternative options there are. And we did things such as, if they said they were interested in walking, we'd spend a majority of our time looking at walking, look at routes you could take through a park, look at the fastest routes along the side of a road, and provide lots of different alternative options. And we also directed participants towards different resources such as cycle safety courses. So this was really the bulk of our intervention. So we had the air pollution monitors and the travel planning sessions. So what we did then was we just left the participants for 4 months to see what happened to their travel behaviour, with the hope obviously that people stopped walking and started either cycling or walking to work. So we left them for a 4-month period. At the end of that 4 months, we then had a follow-up questionnaire, which again captured information on their travel behaviour, so we could compare it to what their behaviour was like at the start of our intervention. And I then had a bit of data analysis, because actually, although I'm presenting just a snapshot of data here, we got a lot of data out of this. So I'll show you what we found. So this graph here is travel behaviour at the very start when we recruited people. So you can see the majority of people, well, most always drove to work, and some occasionally walked or cycled. But we made sure that no one who was recruited in this part of it was always walking or cycling to work. So we then, at the end of the 4 months, we found that there was then a shift here. So there was a decrease in the number of people that are always walking or always driving. So it went down from about 40 to about 9 participants. We then got an increase in people occasionally walking or cycling. And I suppose the good news is we got a few people, 3 individuals, that by the end of it were just walking and cycling, and these were people that previously were driving. So I think, unfortunately, we have small numbers here, and we did want to replicate it again, get more data, but obviously COVID meant that this wasn't possible. But I think it shows that things moved in the right direction. We then have some data on actual air pollution exposure. So this is particulate matter exposure. On the left-hand side, we have levels at the start, right-hand side at the end, and you can see there was a decrease, although non-significant, in this is all combined air pollution exposure. So it went down from about 10.6 micrograms per metre cubed to about 7.9. To put that in context, the EU annual upper threshold of exposure is 25 micrograms per metre cubed. So we're below that, although we can't really compare them because this is a snapshot and not an annual average. But we did see that decline. And I think this is the bit that probably will be of most use and interest to you all. So we asked all participants at the start and at the end of the study, what are the main reasons you choose not or you can't walk or cycle to work? So these are the main reasons that came up, although there are actually a lot more that people mentioned. So number one is around childcare responsibilities and fixed working hours. Essentially, people felt that if they were dropping a child off at school or nursery and they then had to get into work for a fixed time, it just wasn't possible to walk or cycle. So the only way to meet that time commitment was to drive to work, especially if your working hours aren't particularly flexible. People felt that they often had to transport quite bulky items, which just wasn't possible to do if you wanted to walk or cycle. And then a big problem that came up was safety concerns. And I'd say the majority of people who didn't walk or cycle, their number one reason was they just feel unsafe, particularly unsafe cycling to work, and they wouldn't be willing to do it. And then there were things around a lack of facilities, so lack of workplace cycling facilities. And then the opposite end of this is like, so then what would encourage you to walk or cycle in the future? So one thing that came up was a park and ride system. And the idea here is that a lot of people felt like they live too far away to be able to walk the whole way to work. But actually, if they could drive part of the way, they could then at least walk the last part of the journey. And again, that would be good for air pollution, because it's that final part where we get the bottlenecks of air pollution. People wanted the option to leave bulkier items at work. And I know there are already lockers for staff, but I think people still feel like there isn't enough opportunity to leave everything they need at work. More flexible working hours would be beneficial, so people can do those childcare commitments and then walk or cycle to work. An interesting idea is that for a lot of people, actually just buying a bike is a real financial barrier. So some kind of discount at local cycle shops would at least allow them to then purchase a bike so they could start cycling in the first place. People talked about wanting improved workplace facilities. So again, I know there are some, but people felt that the showers are limited. There aren't really any changing facilities. And actually in the winter, there's nowhere to dry your cycling gear. So you're just left with wet things all day. And people also wanted more information on levels of air pollution. So those are the main things that came out as what would help people walk or cycle to work in the future. So almost at the end here, so I think quick summary is that we did see an overall reduction in the number of car journeys, although sample size is quite small. We saw the increase in people walking and cycling. We got some useful information on factors that would encourage people to walk and cycle to work in the future. And I think there is an opportunity for a modified version of this to be effective in encouraging a behaviour change in more members of staff. I think it's quickly worth mentioning there are probably some limitations, such as this was quite resource intensive, particularly having to do the one-to-one travel planning sessions, and there was also quite a high dropout rate, so about a third of people didn't make it to the end, and I'm not sure what the reasons for that exactly were. So we did have some recommendations. So our first one was that all staff would be encouraged to plan alternative walking, cycling or public transport options for their commute to work before returning to work in office locations following the pandemic. And one opportunity is Warwickshire County Council has an active travel resource that can be used. And the second recommendation was steps to be taken to continue to address barriers identified in this study that participants report as reasons for being unable or unwilling to cycle or walk to work. And yeah, these are the sort of things that I mentioned around lack of infrastructure or financial barriers. So that's the end of the presentation, but I'm very happy to answer any questions. And I just got a list here of people that were involved in developing this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Just looking down the list, give it a minute to update. So I've got John Holland, Andy Sargent, Dave Shilton and Keith Condicourt. So I'll take you all in that order. John, you first, please.
Thank you, Chair. And you see, I have now found the hand. Microsoft have clearly updated my version of Teams, and it's been mixed in with a load of other things. Anyway, can I say well done for that report and presentation? I thought that was really excellent, and actually it's practical. It gives us a way forward. When the multi-agency safeguarding hub was set up in the Saltisford Park offices, as the local councillor, I asked for a travel plan because there are about 250 staff assigned to this unit, and there was no spare car parking, and the traffic and air quality issues were awful. I have to say also thank you to Dr. Inglis, who issued me with the air quality monitor. And Dr. Inglis has been involved in the design of the Warwick Town Centre traffic scheme, which was agreed in 2016 and slowly progressing. But I asked for a travel plan for the MASH, and one was produced and issued to the staff. And it does include walking. It includes facilities cyclists need, such as secure storage, showers. And I remember when we were talking to National Grid, they said that they doubled the number of staff cycling to work by providing a female changing room with things like hairdryers, and I think all of that was included. When the first 50 staff were in place, I asked how many of them were cycling, and was told it was 17 out of, which is what, a third of the staff were cycling to work, which seems very high. And when I looked into that, it's because the first staff included quite a number of police officers who are used to not being able to park at police stations, and actually people who like keeping fit and like cycling to work. But the travel plan did include where the bus stops are, because it's very well served by buses, and so on. And I thought that's quite an example of good practice, and does seem to have worked. I think that the 29,000 people driving to work is a Warwick district figure, including Kenilworth, Leamington, Warwick and rural areas. And there are actually 29,000 people from outside of Warwick district who drive to work inside Warwick district. And quite separately, there are 29,000 residents of Warwick district who drive out of the district to work. So the problem that we have is absolutely massive, and it really is massive. And later on our agenda, we're looking at developer funding, and maybe there's more of a need to focus developer funding on producing the sort of outcomes you talked about in your presentation. But one final point is, from the measurements that I've taken in Warwick, and you know, as a physicist who has taught students how to carry out experiments, how to design experiments and analyse the data over many years, the problem is the fine particulates, which currently the Air Quality Authority, which is the District Council, don't measure the particulates. And when I've talked to our public health about this, now certainly some come from wood-burning stoves, but the majority of the fine particulates come from tyres and brakes. And of course electric cars have exactly the same tyres and brakes, so a switch to electric will not actually address the air quality problem. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Is there anything you'd like to come back on?
Thanks for that, Councillor Holland. The point about, I was surprised when that figure, the 29,000 commuting into Warwick, when I discovered that, I was shocked that the number was so high. And it is a massive figure. But I think the point on the particulate matter is really important, and I think we're still a bit unsure about exactly where the health impacts of air pollution come from. Is it NO2? Is it particulate matter? But I think it's actually started to emerge that maybe particulate matter is one of the leading causes of health problems. And you're right. I think the disappointing thing there is if everyone moved to electric vehicles, you still do have those particulate matter exposure because, like you say, the tyres, the brakes, the braking mechanisms. I think that's just a bit depressing, isn't it? That we thought that electric cars were the part of the solution, but I think they decrease the overall exposure. But yeah, it was a good point.
Thanks very much for that, John. Andy, I've got you up next.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I thought it was a really good report, and I like the topical bike in the background on your picture. I think that's really good. I mean, one of the things that I think I was thinking during the report, and you did mention it, was that the changing rooms, because in the past I have cycled to work in Nuneaton. I mean, I'm working at Cricket at the minute, and I don't fancy cycling there, to be fair. And the problem is that you ended up with a load of wet clothes that you had to try and change in the gents' toilets, which weren't particularly favourable or clean. And then where would you dry them in the day? So, I was driving a truck, so I've got them all laid out on the passenger seat, trying to direct the fan onto them to dry them out. And then by the end of the day, they were still a bit damp. And then you come home feeling damp. So I think there's a big thing there with education to employers to provide something and better. One of the noticeable things I've noticed in the places I've been working is the lack of bike shelters, and storage for people to, if you do bike, that your bike, when you come back, your bike's still going to be there and it's going to be dry to ride back. One of the things in the past, it was in the 80s when I worked at Corley Services, is that they used to have a bus that used to go around and pick people up for certain shifts. So it was, if you were at this bus stop at such and such time, it would take you there. It cost you £1 a week or something it was at the time. And what I found was, I worked at Magna Park because I was living in Nuneaton. Magna Park's probably about 15-20 minutes from where I live. I still wouldn't fancy biking it, to be fair, but it's trying to find a direct bus route, and somebody will probably find one that I could probably use, but at the time, for a start time of say 2 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't find it, so I had to drive. And if you look at the size of some of these industrial estates, especially Magna Park, which is extending on, and the one down by the Rugby truck stop, I mean, that's expanding down there. There's a lot more of these big sheds going up. It's impossible for people to get there. If at the minute I'm working at Crick from Nuneaton, I don't particularly want to ride a bike, and there's no buses. So I think that the sort of bus service, if you like, for big factories where maybe there's a lot of people. Because I remember, like I say, at Corley, this bus used to come round, pick us up, and then at 10 past 3, whenever your shift finished, it would take you home. I mean, it took a bit longer, but it was a good service for £1. It was convenient. So I think something like that could be looked at. I mean, we were talking about that gigafactory, bike factory earlier. That could be something that could be put on the radar, couldn't it? Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Andy. Paul, have you got anything you need to add to Andy's comments?
Just interesting comments. It does echo with what people said. So yeah, the driving facilities, people are happy over the summer, but then as soon as you get to the wetter months, that's when people just stop. So even people that were willing didn't really feel like it was an option. And you're right, the buses always come up as an issue, don't they? So it's like even people that lived on bus routes, the time just didn't work. So often, I can't remember, one participant, the last bus of the day was something at 4:30, so they just couldn't get to the last bus of the day to then get home again. So you're right, although they were willing, they just couldn't do that as an option. But yeah, I like your idea that you have almost one mass bus to take people at the end of the day.
Yeah, it used to be, it was Corley Services at the time, and they ran 3 bus services a day all round Nuneaton and Bedworth and whatever, and just pick people up. So, yeah.
Thanks, Andy. I think Tesco's in Bedworth used to actually run a bus as well for shops and workers, which was a good idea. It's a bit of a shame that they stopped that, but yeah, I do remember the Tesco bus used to go and pick people up. Not a bad idea when you want people to shop in your shop, really.
Well, yeah.
So I've got Dave, Keith, and then Margaret. So Dave Shilton, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a good thing that is. I think got me thinking of days when I was working down the coal mine. There was always a bus to pick us up in the morning, bring us home after the shift, and then the next shift would go in and be brought home the same. So there's all the bus service working. My question is this: was the car share situation taken into account? As the first question, the second, that's Paul, of course, and thanks for the presentation, Paul. With the car share, I'm interested because we did promote that at County Council. And the other one is, of course, the train station, the train line between Leamington and Nuneaton is down at the moment, and a lot of people are using that line to commute to our towns, from our towns to work. Is there any pressure you can put on that also to help us get that reinstated? Thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you for that. So yeah, the car share, we didn't take that into account, I'm afraid. So we focused just on people who were driving on their own up to 5 miles. So that was like our recruitment criteria. Your second question, I might pass that over to Nadia, if she's here. So I'm not sure the answer.
Hi, yes, and thanks, Paul, for that presentation. It's really good to see it come full circle and now be presented, which is great because it's taken a long time to do all of that and analyse the results. Councillor Shilton, I'm not sure. I'll have to be honest about the train line between Leamington and Nuneaton. I mean, obviously, from a public health perspective, sort of as we come out of the COVID pandemic, I think there's lots of opportunities for us to think about how we work in the future and indeed sort of how people travel to work. And yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate usually for public transport. At the moment, obviously, it's a really difficult time for everybody because public transport use is obviously, we're not necessarily recommending that as the main form of transport at the moment. But coming out of this, absolutely, we'd want to see, people travelling as much as possible. I mean, ideally walking and cycling, but if not, then on buses and on trains as well. So I do think, sort of from a public health perspective, we need to reconnect with our transport colleagues on this because I know a huge amount of work has been going on over the last year on the local transport plan and things. So we will certainly be looking to reconnect with our transport officer colleagues on that. So sorry, I don't really have a very good answer for you on that at the moment.
That's helpful, Nadia, it really is. It shows us that you are on board with it. And the train stations in particular, very, very useful facility after all the years before putting in Kenilworth particularly. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Keith, I've got you up next.
Thank you, Chair. In 2019, I cycled probably the most I've ever cycled, probably lost 5 or 6 kilograms, and a lot of that was helped by having a cycle store at the other end. We got the Borough Council to actually put cycle secure storage at the back of there, and we should really be working on this quite hard, that every employer has a secure cycling storage. Doesn't always need to be covered, but covered's good. But there's a lot of bicycle thefts, and we had staff at the Borough Council who was going to stop cycling because their bicycles were being stolen at the back of the council house. So secure cycle storage, and then you've got this health benefit of when it's nice, people can get the weight off, get the exercise on, and cycle. I've actually put on 3 or 4 kilograms since COVID started. The lack of cycling is really bad for your health. So a couple of other things. The particulates are a really important source of harm. 10 is the World Health Organization's limit, and the Americans look at 10. Our 25 limit is ridiculously high. So I think as a county council, we should be looking at where the health evidence is and trying to get the 10 down to 5, those sort of areas. And electric cars and everything actually produces particulate emissions as well. And quite a lot of places, particularly the continent, actually wash roads in the summer when it's very dry, because passing traffic actually, if you're in Spain and places like that in summer, they have a lot of particles actually raised off the road by passing traffic. So there's a lot of, obviously we get rain in winter, so we have a lot less particles from vehicles. But yeah, actually in dry periods, actually trying to down the particulates is really important. But really, really good work. And coming back to the cycle shop discount idea. We've lost a lot of our cycle shops. There used to be a great one in Attleborough. There used to be a few more in the town centre, and all the towns around Warwick. I mean, there was one in Warwick I've been in occasionally, and that's gone. We need to do something. And I think the cycle shops closed at just the wrong time because cyclists gone mad. But I think the county council does need to be really actively trying to get cycle retailing back up in the county, and particularly for people who don't cycle, to have their bikes repaired because they've not got the skills. So you need that cycle shop. You can't order a bike on mail order and then send it back when you need something done at it. So we do need to build that infrastructure up, and some of the travel plans, like this mega battery factory, if it happens, it should have cycle racks. Also, there needs to be some infrastructure to support those cyclists. Quite a lot of them will have high-paid jobs, be really busy, and they haven't got time to faff fixing a bicycle. So actually, having a discount and having a cycle retailer tied in with that is really, really important. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Paul, have you got anything to add to Keith's comments?
Yeah, just very quickly, one other thing that came up around the financial incentive is that I know, I don't know if it's still in place now, but there was the workplace payment scheme where you, I forget how it exactly works, but where you pay back through your wage. But there were some comments from participants that I think there were some issues at the time, maybe it was on pause or on hold. So I think there were people who were interested but were struggling to actually access it. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Margaret, I can see your hand still up.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I was really pleased that you concentrated on particulate matter. We have a lot of information on NOx, but I've been pushing the Borough and Environmental Health to try and monitor particulate matter. I'm particularly worried about it. And I know that you were looking at the impact of transport, and I understand that was your project. And of course, we've got those impacts in my area, like every area, but we've also got things like quarries, landfill, animal rendering plant, Severn Trent facility, all in the same area. And I really do need to know about the particulate matter. So if one of the outcomes from your really good project could be to encourage the environmental health officers to monitor particulate matter, and we don't get that data easily at the moment, that would be a really good outcome, because we could then start to look at what's causing it as well as transport. We understand transport does, but as well as that. So thank you for your project, and I hope it has a wider impact. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Margaret. My computer's having a bit of a moment. Paul, can you add anything to what Councillor Bell has said?
No, but yeah, thank you. And you're right. I think obviously there's more sources than just travel, and you're right. Like industry is also an important source. I think maybe again, Nadia's probably best to respond. I think she's more involved in this now. But I think one option is obviously using the portable monitors. But I think that I should just have a word of caution as well, that I think these portable monitors aren't as accurate as the fixed monitoring stations. And I think so you get the big argument within the air pollution scientists who would advise against using them because they're not 100% accurate, but then they are very indicative of, they give you a good idea, but then I wouldn't rely on the results to say this is definitely the levels of exposure. But I think they're a good way to get a general idea. Thank you.
Thanks. I noticed Kieran's just put a comment in the chat to say that the new WCC Cycle to Work scheme was relaunched in November. 12 months, higher tax-free options to purchase at the end. Now, obviously November is not the best timing considering we've been in the pandemic, pretty much locked down since then. But looking at this, I believe there is a scheme there for people to pick up on the cycle to work. Keith, I can see your hand is up again. Is that new or is that an old one?
Yeah, just to come back on, Paul, about the monitoring. Yes, I found the monitors to be quite inaccurate. Particularly if you cycle, they're quite good if you walk. But if you're cycling along at any speed, the mobile monitors are useless. And there's actually various community sites where people can buy their own PM10 monitors. the actual government is really cheap, and someone set one up in Bedworth. So there's a whole network of community self-funded particulate monitors, and it might be useful to have one in Hartshill and one in Neaton. And it might be that the council could encourage people to monitor their own static air quality because it doesn't have the inaccuracies of the ones that move. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Keith. Paul, again, have you got anything to come back? No. So I'd just like to add a couple of comments onto that with the aspect of planning. Mostly that sits with districts and boroughs, so it could be something that is made, we make representation to the districts and boroughs to review their planning policies to make sure that when they are looking at employment facilities and employment land, which I know given some of the local plans that are coming into fruition at the moment contain employment land, it might be worth actually them, the districts and boroughs themselves, including lockable cycle storage within their local policies for employment land. So that's something that can be dealt with more at a district and borough level, not necessarily at a county level. I'm sure if we were looking at implementing our own employment buildings, we would look to incorporate something along those lines ourselves. However, you know, we would have to rely on the districts and boroughs to do that at a more local level. And I can't actually see anybody else's hand up to raise any points on this, so I'm going to take it that everybody's happy to move on to the next agenda item, and that is just to say thank you as well, Paul. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but thank you very much for the presentation. We really do appreciate it, actually. And the next one I've got, item 5, is the developer contributions reporting an annual infrastructure statement. So we have my list. I've got Chris Egan, who is the lead commissioner for strategic growth and infrastructure, and Graham Palmer, infrastructure strategy and commissioning lead, to present and answer any questions as required. So I will hand over to the team.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Chris Egan, as you said, the street lead for Street Growth and Infrastructure, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the paper today. First of all, though, I would like to acknowledge and give credit to Graham in my team, who has put together today's report, and highlight that Graham and myself will be happy to provide any additional points of clarity or answer any questions that you may have following my introduction. As the paper has been circulated ahead of the meeting, I don't propose going through in great detail, but will provide an introductory summary. The report and appendices summarise existing legal agreements that are in place and provide an update on the Council's annual infrastructure statement in line with government legislation and advice. As members will be aware, the annual infrastructure statement itself is a requirement for all local authorities to publish an annual report that sets out their developer contributions for the previous year. In doing so, the statement provides a financial summary of existing 106 SIL agreements that are in place and are currently live and being monitored. The 2019-2020 annual infrastructure statement was approved by Cabinet on the 10th of December 2020 and was then published later that month on the 31st of December. The production of the statement has, for the team, been a learning curve, and in future years, the lessons learned will be applied to reduce the burden of production and provide more information than just the minimum requirements as set out in current government legislation and guidance. This will provide members and residents with increased transparency on the developer contributions, and longer term provide the potential for a self-service system which will reduce the burden of solicitors and developers and their queries on the strategic growth and infrastructure team. To support these aspirations, the committee is asked to note that the publication of the annual infrastructure statement. It's asked to note the approach that has been taken and suggest how the statement can become more useful and relevant to committee, the members and developers to support economic growth in Warwickshire. So with that introduction, Chair, I would thank you and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm not currently seeing any hands raised. In fact, I've got one now from Keith. John. Okay, so we'll start with Keith. I think they're just a bit slow coming through on my machine.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, things are a bit slow in clicking on. So thank you for pausing a second. Yeah, there's a phenomenal amount of money that's not been spent. And obviously it's quite difficult. We get it in dribs and drabs from developers. It's really good the government's forced councils to produce these reports because it does at least give us a picture of what's going on. But what's not in the report is how long the money's been hanging around. You know, the 55 million that's or received before the financial year and not yet spent. Some of that could actually have been hanging around for 5 or 6 years. And on the other side, we've got things like the new railway station entrance we want in Wellington that isn't even yet on a programme to actually ask for money yet. So we're really not getting enough out of developers because we take ages over getting any money and then we don't have money ready to spend on the things we've got ready to start. So I don't know how we can do better on that, how we can get infrastructure. I mean, there was an idea about having a little mini bank effectively, so we could actually build stuff and then charge the developers when things came online. I don't know if we're going anywhere with that, so maybe you could sort of clarify. So it's a temple thing is a big issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Keith. I'm not sure if you would like to come back on that, Chris or Graham.
Graham, do you want to take it?
Yeah, so part of the negotiation of the Section 106 is we put in trigger points that relate to progress on the development. So at the point that it's negotiated, we bring in the money at a point that we think is sensible to make sure the infrastructure is provided at the right time. We also include in the agreements flexibility around the time that we have to spend the contribution, again, to make sure that the infrastructure is provided at the right time and to make sure that we as county council are able to spend the money within that time scale. So some of the contributions that we have, for example, might be waiting for a capital project code to be moved on to. So there are various reasons why we can holding funds, and often that is for the benefit of the county council to make sure that we have the flexibility around when to provide the infrastructure.
Thanks, Graham. John, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much for the report. And I think the point that was made about transparency is really important because the system on developer funding and so on is very much bound up with regulations of what we're allowed to ask for and what we're not. And it's very complicated and it changes all the time. And, you know, 106 agreements are fixed on the date that the agreement is signed. And we've had really development going on with developer funding all the time I've been a councillor, going back to 1999 and before then. And I do appreciate how difficult it is for council officers to predict what infrastructure is going to be needed and then funding it, and well done. What I would say though is, I noticed on your presentation you've got a picture of a road on the cover, and I wonder if actually in the light of our earlier discussion whether that is the things that we should be featuring, bearing in mind that healthy transport options would push people away from road travel. We've actually got schools that have been funded with developer funding or had significant contributions. Might not a school have been a better thing. And also the NHS, which with the COVID emergency is absolutely at the front of everybody's mind at the moment. And there has been funding of the NHS, but we found that not necessarily where it's needed. But even so, any money you get into the NHS is something that we'd be really proud of at the moment, and maybe that's the thing to feature. But I'd be interested in what your difficulties are in supporting hospitals or GP practices or other specialist areas. Thank you.
Thanks,
John. Sorry, go on, Chris.
Yeah, just first of all, yes, Councillor Holland, I would agree with you. In future years, we'll look at a more appropriate picture on the front of the cover for the infrastructure statement, given as well that the predominantly highways are delivered through Section 278 works and not covered actually by the annual infrastructure statement itself. In relation to NHS and other contributions, what we have to do is work with developers directly to ensure that whatever demand is created on services comes from that particular development. Which can make it quite difficult to get the larger infrastructure projects in that you talk about. And that takes time, coordination with the districts, and also third-party partners as well.
And it's my understanding that I believe it's the CCGs, the clinical commissioning groups, that actually do the planning application responses on behalf of the NHS. So whilst we will work with public health and colleagues in the NHS in terms of negotiating the 106, it's the CCG's responsibility to request the contributions from the NHS from developers, is my understanding.
Thanks. Yes, you're right. It's not necessarily a county council responsibility to request NHS monies. Dave Shilton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's an ongoing question, and that is the developer fundings and that. And a lot are not being paid because the developer won't hand over their road networks for adoption. So therefore, it puts us in a situation that we can't claim the monies. Is that still the situation, or has that changed now? So one time, I had a road down by me 12 years before it was adopted. There's been one in Warwick, which I knew about in our portfolio, a big estate, and they just would not hand over for the adoption of the road, so they'd have to pay the money. That's unacceptable. If we can get that sorted, I'll be grateful. Thank you.
I think that is it is slightly outside the remit of the infrastructure statement, in that the internal road network tends to be covered through what was called the Section 38 agreements, and that is the Section 38 agreements, put crudely, is that the developer will put their plans forward to the local authority. The local authority or county highways will approve those plans, and then the developer will build according to. Then there is a process whereby the local authority will check the status of the roads, ensure that they've been built against the designs that have been put in place, and then they'll go on to a maintenance and then adoption process. What tends to happen is that if there's any variance between the road design and road construction, it makes it very difficult then for highways to adopt it. But the ROs, that process is outside of the 106 mechanism.
Yeah, just to add, in terms of getting in the Section 106 contributions, I at the moment do the invoicing for that and liaise with the developers. And I'm not aware of any Section 106 contribution that's been delayed because of a road that hasn't been adopted. That at least in my time. So it may be that it's outside of, as Chris says, outside of the Section 106 contributions. That's an issue.
Thanks, Bob. Does that answer your question, Dave? Oh, you're on mute, Dave. Still on mute. You got it? I'll tell you what, Dave. I'll come back to you if you need to, because you're still on mute. Okay. Mark, I can see your hand raised. Mark Ryder.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say something about the flexibility around the infrastructure funding. Of course, to a very large extent, there is very specific requirements on where the money should be spent and what it should be spent on, which ties our hands in being able to use it as a Bank of Warwickshire approach for infrastructure. That's not to say, though, that we can't be smart with the money and we can't use it alongside some of our own capital investments and third-party money that we get in through government or funding bids through Dave's team to sort of link up things. I mean, a really good example, a complicated example, but a good one, is the Europa Way scheme, which is about the largely developer-funded improvements along Europa Way based on developments on both sides. But actually, we've geared in some of our money there to improve the overall stretch. So there's ways we can use the money that has flexibility about it. To a very large extent, though, the money that's in the on Graham and Chris's list there is quite there's quite a lot of restriction applied to it in terms of what we can do. On the point of Section 38, and I totally share Councillor Shilton's frustration with this. There's only so much we can do to actually drive things through to adoption. It's got to be the developers that come forward to do that. There's no legal requirement for them to do so. But we do work with them and try to press on getting more adopted because it's for everyone's benefits. And of course, we end up with a liability for the road, so we need to make sure that they are built to the correct specification. And just lastly, I 100% agree with Councillor Holland's point on the pictorial on the front of the report, and we'll make sure we do better next year. You know, easy to get focused on highways where a lot of the money goes, but no, we'll have a better front cover for you next year, Councillor Holland. Thank you.
Yeah. Chair, Claire, I've gone back now. All the pictures went off and I lost you. I'm satisfied with those answers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. So Margaret, I've got Margaret and then Keith. Over to you, Margaret.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much for the report. It's really helpful and it's good to have that transparency. I suppose my comment really is about I'll tell you what it feels like, and actually to some extent Mark Rhodes answered some of my questions, but it feels a little ad hoc, a bit formulaic. You've got so many houses, that equals so much money for transport, so much money for health, etc., etc. Whereas I think we really ought to be looking a little bit more about the specific conditions that people are trying to build in, and some of them are very difficult, and they need to understand that there may be very difficult highways issues, and therefore their contribution should reflect that. And the other thing I wanted to say was, there is a very good report, and I'll probably forget its name. Is it the Infrastructure Delivery Plan or something? It was based on the districts and boroughs' local plans, and it looked at those and said, what would we have to do if these plans came forward? It's a really good document, but it doesn't seem to be used when we're looking at 106 contributions. And I know that a single development will not be able to fund some of the things in that report, but if we had a plan for each area, we could look at several different projects to contribute to providing something of real significance in an area where it is going to be developed significantly. And maybe that's going on, but it's not visible. It isn't visible outside to think there is a plan and we'll take a bit from each of these developments and we'll make that significant thing happen. And maybe we have to put some more Warwickshire County Council money to it, as Mark was saying, and be more creative. It would be helpful if it felt a bit more like a plan than a little bit ad hoc. So, thank you.
Mark, do you want to just come back on that? I can see your hand went up again.
Oh, no, sorry, I can't resist. I mean, there's so much that's right about what Councillor Bell says. And we are doing some of that. We're focusing on a place, get the partners around, including the developers, and think about what that's going to look like, and get away from very sort of transactional. It's got to be, $500,000 for education, for 500 houses, whatever it is. The reality, though, is these are commercial organisations that won't necessarily want to pay £1 more than they really have to through this negotiated process. And it's not always easy to get that shared vision in place working with them. It does happen, though, and I do see some improvements. I mean, Holton in Rugby is a good example of that development, where you had a developer who's very keen to put forward funding in to make and think about that place. So that worked well. And I think we need to, I would want to work more along those lines with developers. We're starting to get around the table more with developers proactively now as well, so that we can talk about how their various schemes in a place interact with each other. Europa Way is a good example of that. But not always easy, because their drivers aren't necessarily our drivers. Thank you.
I think just to add to what Mark was saying, and to answer Mark's question, we do have actually quite, as the County Council, quite significant influence in input into the infrastructure delivery plans, which are linked to each of the local plans with the districts. But as Mark has alluded to there, we can only ask for contributions relevant to one particular development, because we may know of a number of developments coming forward, but some may not come forward for 10, 15 years after the first one. So we can only ask for the infrastructure requirements from that particular development at the time when it comes into the planning system.
One thing just to add as well is that previously we were limited by the SIL legislation that meant we couldn't ask for, we couldn't have more than 5 developments contribute to one infrastructure project. And those limits have been scrapped through this recent legislation. So it's a relatively recent thing that we're not restricted by pooling, as it was called. Under the new legislation, we are allowed to fund one single project from multiple developments now, which is helpful.
That's very welcome. Thank you.
Keith, I can see your hand again. Is that?
Yeah, just to come back on Mark's comments about timing and infrastructure. Yeah, I want to really point on the railway station entrance and Stockley Ford station. These things need funding a little bit from lots of developers, and we need to then develop them before all the developments have happened. So we do need that sort of mini bank, so we can build things and then get some money back if we can do that somehow.
Thanks, Keith. Mark, is there anything to come back on, or are you?
Yeah, I mean, I think by way of concept, the bank and the pooling approach is a sound one. I think the point I was making was, we can't think we've got a £55 million bank that we can divvy up as we see fit. There's far more constraints, but I think in thinking creatively, we can bring things forward using pockets of 106 money, linked to a 278 scheme, linked to a government fund, maybe linked to something of our own funding through SIF. So there are ways to do it. So I do agree with that concept, and I think it is something we do.
Thanks, Mark. I can't see anybody else with the hand raised for questions. If there is anybody, can you shout just in case? No, not seeing anyone. Okay, so thanks, Chris and Graham, which happens to be my brother's name, Chris Graham. It's very odd. Thank you very much for your time and your report. And yeah, I'm sure you've noted about the picture, so we'll get a different picture next time, John. And
recommendations are welcome.
And I will have a look now, and we're going to go over to agenda item 6, which is the knuckle briefing update. And have we got Margaret on? There you are,
Yes,
Margaret.
I did. Thank you, Chair.
So for anybody that doesn't know, Margaret is the team lead in transport planning, and she's going to answer any questions that we might have on the report that was given to us.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Are you going to do a quick introduction, Margaret, or are you just going to
Yeah, no, happy to do that, Chair.
Yeah, fine, yeah, off you go then.
So just very briefly, thank you for the introduction. So I think most people are aware of the scheme that will allow 2 trains per hour to run between Coventry and Nuneaton. And to be able to do that, it requires a new bay platform at Coventry Station. The scheme is led by Coventry City Council. We are a partner in the scheme. We brought a report to ONS last year to report that there has been a delay, and that was primarily due to having gone out to tender, the scheme cost being much higher, and the tendered cost being much higher than the scheme budget. So it was agreed at that time that we were working with Coventry City Council and Network Rail to look at how we could try and reduce some of those costs, and some high-level workshops were undertaken to agree what the specification of that work would be. So as we reported last year, that work was then due to start. Unfortunately, there's been some delays in commencing this work, and that's really to do with where the funding sits. So currently the funding sits with Coventry. We've got to be able to formalise that so that that money can transfer to Network Rail. That's taken longer than anybody anticipated. In the background, we've been looking at how we can keep momentum going, and there is some residual funding from an earlier knuckle phase, which we are now putting in to allow that work to commence. And I'm pleased to report that we've got a first meeting with the Network Rail team and colleagues at Coventry next week. Progress with this work will then report back up to the Knuckle Strategic Board. So that's all I really have to say. Obviously happy to take any questions that you may have. And Councillor Shilton, I can also pick up on I can pick up on the question you asked earlier. Obviously at the moment, I think people will be aware that currently the rail service from Leamington up to Coventry and then Coventry up to Nuneaton is currently suspended. We are actively in discussion with West Midlands Trains around that. That's at the highest level, so that's Councillor Second, that's Jeremy Wright, are involved in those conversations. It's an ongoing dialogue. We are keen to work with them and as soon as possible have that service reinstated. We feel that is a priority. Sorry, Councillor Second, I didn't realise you were on the call. Any questions on that, happy to take that as well. Okay, thank you.
That's great news, Chair. I really appreciate that. But I was going to ask another question. Because this is about the platform and the Coventry Knuckle to Nuneaton, what's the chance of trying to talk about bringing that right through to Leamington at the same time? We'll give a better service all the way around.
Yes, if I just pick up on that, so that is what was currently timetable, Councillor Shilton. So we have a through service from Nuneaton down to Leamington. Is that what you mean? Sorry. Yeah, so we already have that. So we don't need the bay platform for that. That was just in terms of the timetable work that was done and finding the right paths to be able to make that connecting service.
That's great. Great news. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So, I see. Izzy, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in on that?
Well, I think it was really just to add to Margaret's additional points. We're sort of dueling this process. There's an officer level meeting, which is usually held about 2 days after the meeting with Jeremy Wright and with myself. I will say they are being very approachable, very user-friendly, and they appear to be very open about it. The issue is very much about COVID and why COVID has impacted on the concerns about workforce and drivers and manning the capacity. The issue they have is they have not been able to do training of new drivers in the way that they would normally. There has to be an element of front-facing, in-cab training, and where they have tried to do this, they've had a couple of bubbles burst, and so that's gone back to the drawing board. So where they probably are losing some through age and retirement at one end, they're just not getting it in the other end. So I would say, and I've taken this up on a national basis, because that will not be just peculiar to us here. That's going to be a national concern and a national issue, and we're going to have to try to really beef up the process of getting people trained up when we can. In the meantime, they have got a genuine problem, and they have committed fully to maintaining the bus service until such time as they can, with confidence, put the train service back into operation. They have no commitment whatsoever to reducing this service. They know how important it is. I happen to stress to them that it's used quite a lot from the point of view of school children who are accessing Coventry schools. So, that angle they are aware of as well. And Dave, if it's any comfort to you, I will continue, as I know Margaret will, we will continue with our regular meetings with them, and we will continue to give you updates.
Thank you, Izzy. Thank you. It is needed, and I do appreciate it. Thank you.
In addition to what's just been said, I receive news updates as well from West Midlands Rail, and they've actually put out in their public latest news document from February that about the reduction in services, and they explain why they've had to do it, but they do say that it's being kept under close review with a view to reinstating services when possible. So I think everybody's on the same page with this one. I think everybody wants the services back up and running, but they do have issues with staff and COVID and what have you. So it's just everything's just playing into this. But yeah, I do think we're all on the same page with getting that service back up and running. So I've now got Keith and then Andy Sargent. So Keith, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. This delay on Knuckle has been going on for an awful long while. I've actually got the documents from 2008, 13 years ago, when the project was first being planned. So we really do need to get it progressed. And one of the big things has always been the oil train. There's actually an old oil depot at Bayton Road Industrial Estate, which hasn't run for many years now. It must have been defunct about 3 years. And even before it was defunct, it only ran once or twice a week. And that oil train is causing us to build millions of pounds of infrastructure that is not going to be used and will probably never be used in future. And I think we should have, years ago, looked at buying out this historic oil train, because to have an oil train that runs, and the oil train is too long to fit in the siding, so it goes on the main line, blocks the Eton to Coventry railway, and that is causing horrendous design costs, which are totally irrelevant because the oil train no longer runs. So I suggested it's probably cheaper to buy the oil depot, which is closed, and then sell it back again without the grandfather rights, because it is just lunacy to spend millions on infrastructure that has no user. I also think we do need to look at what we're doing with replacement bus services, because they're mostly running empty, and we've got a very frequent bus service on the corridor as well, and we really, from the carbon point of view and the sensibility point of view, should be merging the replacement bus service with the regular bus service. So actually they have cross-ticketing, because the buses run every 10 minutes on that corridor from the Eton to Bedford to Coventry. The replacement bus service is once an hour, but it's slower. And so to actually run this replacement bus service is just burning money, when we should actually try and have joined up public transport. Thank you, Chair.
I can come in on both of those, Chair.
Yeah, please, Margaret.
So firstly, with regard to the oil train, so Councillor Chronicle, we have picked this up with Network Rail as part of the workshops that have been undertaken. The information that they've shared with us is that those paths are actively being looked at. I don't think it's just quite simple that we can stop up those rights, but obviously the work that we are doing is looking across the entire scheme and just looking at where we can make some cost savings. So are there different things that we can do? And we're also looking through the timetable to look at actually those the oil pass in terms of the timing. Could there be some changes with that, or could the timetable be adjusted to fit in around it? So that's the way that we're taking that forward. In terms of the rail replacement bus service, I fully appreciate what you're saying with that, and I'm happy to raise that in the next meeting we have with West Midlands Trains. What I'm not so sure about is whether
there is almost a duty on them to have to provide that almost as part of the rail franchise they may have a commitment to be able to do that. So whilst I fully appreciate what you're saying, that from an integrated transport perspective it doesn't make sense to be running buses, especially when they may be empty, because the commercial network is far more frequent in terms of its offer. I'm not sure it's quite as simple as them just being able to remove that. Yeah, but I'm happy to bring that up with them.
Thanks, Margaret. Andy, Keith, have you got? Oh, no, your hand's gone down. Andy. Yeah, there you are.
Okay.
Okay.
I was just backing up the a few years back I did actually apply to be a train driver because it's quite good money, but it's very stringent, the training. So basically I failed on eyesight, and obviously it's all about colour blindness, etc., because of the signals. And so what I'm trying to say is very difficult for companies to, train companies to train drivers up, because the actual candidacy or standard of candidates, if you like, is very limited. The other thing is training of bus drivers as well, and truck drivers, because obviously at the minute they're not able to train up any drivers for the PSVs. So while I accept there's buses sort of filling in for train journeys, there could also in the future, sort of 12 months from now, be a problem with bus drivers, because a lot of people are retiring, aren't they? So I think somewhere along the line, somebody, I know there was a scheme for lorry drivers in the past where if you were unemployed, you could get free training, because I mean, just to be a truck driver is about £2,000 or £3,000, and a lot of people haven't got that sort of money. So I wonder if somewhere along the line there's something for bus drivers, train drivers, to support people, to get people into those sort of jobs. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Margaret, have you got any information on the schemes for getting people into train driving and truck driving? Do we have anything like that?
I'm afraid I don't. I don't know whether David and Hill, on a kind of wider skills and economy, do we do anything in terms of that?
I don't know. It's I think it's more simple as I know. As Councillor said, I know we've done things like that in the past, or partners and stakeholders have done that in the past for HGV drivers. It's certainly worth exploring on the train side. Yeah, I'll pick that up with our employability and skills officer and see what the opportunities might be.
And the bus drivers as well, because I think at some point you're going to get a problem there, and it's all public transport.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. I'm not seeing any other hands. So has anybody got any further questions on this? No? Are we all happy to move on then? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret.
Bye-bye.
So now we are up on agenda item 7, which is the scrutiny review paper. We've got Nicola. Can I sit there? You are, Nicola.
Hi,
hello.
Chair.
So Nicola is the strategy and commissioning manager for Legal and Democratic, and you are here to present this and then answer any questions. Yep.
I am.
Thank you. Right, I'll just hand it.
Thanks. I'll do a brief introduction, because I think the most important thing is actually sort of what the members of the committee think about the proposals and how we move forward with scrutiny. So you may recall that we appointed Dr. Jane Martin to give us some advice on scrutiny and how we might possibly improve on operation of scrutiny, and how we might move forward to develop our scrutiny approach so that we can deliver on the council plan and objectives. That work started in February 2020 and was delayed a little as a result of COVID over the last 12 months. But the feedback, as you'll see from the report that was included, is largely positive and highlighted some really good examples of what was considered to be good practice, particularly looking at things like the member working groups on COVID recovery that we've had recently, the TFGs, and a focus on the training that colleagues in adult social care and health have put together. There were some opportunities to improve that were outlined, which I set out at sections 2 and 3 of the report. But what I wanted to focus on, if I could, conscious of your time, is the recommendations from the review and the sort of suggested points to consider that we've included that we very much appreciate your opinions on. The recommendations from the review, I think, can be summarised as moving forward with scrutiny on the basis of a sort of collegiate, constructive and challenging approach with a common purpose amongst the authority, and creating greater alignment with corporate objectives. Greater use of virtual meetings and technology was something that also came out of the discussions that Dr. Martin had with members, and the possible creation of a chairs panel for overview and scrutiny, so that we could look to link up items that might cross the boundaries of different committees, and the possibility of creating a dedicated team of overview and scrutiny officers and reviewing the timetable for committees to make sure that we're holding them at an optimum time alongside the corporate business cycle and cabinet meetings, so that we can capture and tie things together in a cohesive way. The questions that I've included at paragraph 5 are things that we thought might assist people to take a view on how they feel about sort of scrutiny moving forward. Those centre around whether the council does wish to consider reconfiguring overview and scrutiny committees, either to align with the plan or the change portfolio themes, or in some other way, and what the practicalities of that might be. Whether there are ways that we might reinvigorate agendas, and taking the views of members on the opportunities and principles that were recommended in section 2 and 3 of Dr. Martin's report. The things that are particularly of interest at the moment, I think, might be how we might make greater use of technology to support scrutiny, what sorts of meetings might be delivered remotely in the future, if the law allows, and there seem to be some movements on that front at the moment, and how would training be best delivered, and whether actually a dedicated team of DSOs is the way forward, or whether enhancing the function of overview and scrutiny support whilst retaining the roles and allowing people to undertake both parts is in fact a better way forward. Conscious that that's a bit of a gamble through my report, but I think actually the important thing is taking a view from the members of the committee about how they feel about the report and what suggestions they might have. The plan ultimately being to gather that information from all of the committees over this committee cycle, and then put together a proposal that we will bring back to members post-elections on how we see that this might move forward.
Thank you, Nicola. It almost sounds like we need a working party on scrutiny, doesn't it? Yeah, working party on working party. I'm not seeing any hands. There we go. Keith, your hand's just popped up. So I've got Keith now and Andy Jens as well. So Keith, over to you.
Right, thank you, Chair. One of the key issues is timetabling of meetings. I think that does need to be adjusted. Sometimes there are big things decided like cabinet, and the scrutiny means at the wrong time relative to cabinet meetings. We've also had 2 scrutiny meetings today, so I've had a double hit today. I'm on Borough Council this evening, so spacing meetings and getting the stuff right. I am concerned about the chairs stuff though. At the moment, all the chairs are held by the controlling group. I don't think it's very healthy then to have yet another organisation which is only meeting around the controlling group chairs for scrutiny. I think we do need to make these things far more cross-party if we're having some coordination function to make sure things don't get cut out. And I mean, the beginning of today's meeting was an absolute classic where we're not allowed to discuss the Bermuda Bridge project. We got flashed at us for a couple of minutes. Yeah, we should have had a discussion about when we're going to discuss it, and we should have paperwork put in front of us for more than a few seconds. So I think there's lots of issues there which cross-party working and cross-party coordination works better than actually one run by the controlling group. But generally, most scrutiny works quite well. I mean, I think a lot of people, I mean, the health scrutiny was really good and valuable this morning. So I'm very positive in general about scrutiny, but I just want to have those checks and balances, particularly over one party running all the scrutiny, because the scrutiny of scrutiny, if you know, meta scrutiny, because it is important we can scrutinise what we want to scrutinise. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Keith. Am I correct in my memory that the last election cycle we had, it was not the controlling group that held all the scrutiny chairs?
You're quite right.
Yeah. So
yeah.
It's not. So scrutiny chairs aren't necessarily. They're not necessarily all the controlling group, and we have had it in the past where they haven't been the controlling group. So we just need to clarify that on this, because it is going out and people might think differently.
Yeah, you're right. It was there were different party leads on
yeah.
Not on all, but on many.
Yeah, and yeah, we did also have the late Councillor Olner. He was actually on regulatory. He was the chair of regulatory. So again, that was not a Conservative party member. That was so they are not necessarily all taken up by one party. Oh yeah, thanks.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Hi.
All right. I've got Andy, Jens, and John Holland. I can see. So over to Andy, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I only just read this today because all my postmen are sick at the moment, and we're getting the posts in big piles that come in about once a week. But from what I've read, I find this a really good report, and I think the report by Jane Martin is excellent. I wasn't one of the councillors whose name appears on the list of those who were consulted, but from the content of the report, I think what's been said really chimes with my feelings about overview and scrutiny, and I think after the election would be a really good opportunity to relaunch the way we do scrutiny. And I think it, picking up on some of the things that have been mentioned in this report, but I think a chair of all the committees is a good idea. Virtual meetings is certainly going to be useful and excellent, and I think a dedicated team of staff for overview and scrutiny is probably essential to if we're going to do it really well. So I'm very supportive of what's in the report, and I hope we'll be able to sort of look at it in more detail and take it forward after the election. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. John Holland, I can see your hand, so over to you, John.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, before the last election, the scrutiny chairs and vice chairs were opposition councillors, and I think that did tend to give a much more balanced view and a more searching scrutiny. And I think it's fairly obvious, isn't it, that if the scrutiny committee is largely made up of the same political party as the cabinet, that is going to obviously give some difficulties. But with the elections coming up, this is a very timely report, and no doubt the new councillors, and maybe some of the existing ones back, or maybe new people, we don't know. That will be the time to sort it out. What I would put in the pot here is to think about the old committee system, which I had experienced in the past, and that enables much more inclusive decision making. And the difference there is the chair of the committee can only represent the consensus of the committee and take it forward. So in some ways you get much better inclusive decision making, incorporating all views. You know, if one councillor takes a view which is different to everyone else, they may be the only one that's right. We need to actually capture all of those good ideas. But I think this is exactly the right time for the report to come forward. And thank you.
Thanks, John. I'm not seeing any further hands raised. Is there anybody else that wants to make a comment? Okay, I can't see anyone, but Nicola, if you want to come back on any of those things.
I was going to come back and sort of suggest that if there are any members who aren't here today, or if members think of something outside of the meeting, then please do either feed it back via Democratic Services or direct to me, because I think it's important that we capture the views. I know it's adults social care this morning. They were going to sort of take a couple of weeks to pull together a sort of view from the committee, and I'm happy to receive, you know, those comments over the next couple of weeks. That the plan is to start pulling those together from all of the OSCs over this cycle, so that I can kind of pull those together as part of the forward thinking. So if people think something, as I say, afterwards, then please feed it through.
Thanks, Nicola. I think that's pretty much everything now. I think we all seem to be in agreement that this is quite a useful report, and we do all seem to be in agreement of the recommendations on this. So I mean, I'd like to support the recommendations, definitely. There are issues with some aspects of scrutiny. I mean, it was referred to about the start of this meeting, but perhaps if people actually included the committee chair in what they were trying to do rather than not, it might not have happened in the way it did. However, I used my chair's prerogative, and as chair I can do that. So I think everybody is actually quite happy with this report. I'm not seeing any further hands. So is everybody happy to agree what's in the contents and move on to the next agenda item?
Yeah, fully agree, Chair.
Okay. I'm not seeing anybody saying otherwise. So if anybody does want to get in touch with you after the fact, Nicola, they are more than welcome to.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. So I will move on to
point of order.
Who said that? Keith?
Yeah. Can I move that we adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes to let us read the reports that you presented at the beginning to decide if that affects what we want to do on the work programme?
Chair, we've had this on the papers. The report's in there. I think that's plenty of time to do that.
No, there was a report about the Bermuda Bridge, which is a note which we weren't allowed to discuss, which we are apparently going to discuss in June, and I'd like to read that before we discuss the work programme.
Actually, that's not correct. The briefing note was put before us under Chair's announcements, and it was put before us as no discussion, and the briefing note will be pushed out at the end of this meeting, and as mentioned in previous chair and spokes meetings, and actually when I showed the briefing note, we will discuss it at the chair and spokes meeting. We will agree the timescales at the chair and spokes, as we do with all other items. So I'm minded to actually move on to the work programme, and we will discuss the briefing note coming as an agenda item, as we have previously discussed at the chair and spokes meeting, in the next chair and spokes meeting.
You're quite correct, Chair. That's exactly what you said, and that's what should be done.
We agreed at the last chair and spokes meeting. I am minded to stay with that agreement.
Can I have a look at the document, please?
Yeah, it will be forwarded to you.
Before the end of this meeting.
It will be forwarded to you at the end of the meeting.
Can I request we hold another meeting within the next 2 weeks to discuss the contents, or can I suggest we hold a full council to actually discuss why this calling was cancelled and the briefing note then withheld from the next scrutiny
Councillor
meeting?
Condacor, as the chair of the committee where the calling was supposedly called into, I am not aware of any calling. I was only aware of a briefing note at the last minute. The briefing note, actually, I showed it because I need to clarify there is an error on there. I've highlighted the error. It will be sent out after this meeting and we will discuss the full agenda item as previously discussed. The bridge project will come back as a full agenda item for discussion at another meeting. I'm not willing to take this discussion any further. We were moving on to item 8, which is the work programme. So, notwithstanding the comments that have just been made, are there any issues with the work programme?
Chairman, can we accept the work programme?
Does anybody wish to bring anything up, or can we just accept it as written, as it has been written in the previous few meetings?
Chairman, I think that's exactly what you should do. Accept it as it stands, and then call it a day for the day on that one.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. So,
yeah.
Yes, Councillor Condacor. Unless it's anything different, Councillor Condacor, I'd suggest that we are moving on now.
Can I put Bermuda Bridge note on the work programme, please?
The Bermuda Bridge is being worked up as a full agenda item, Councillor Condacor. How many times do I need to repeat myself? I don't see the point in putting a briefing note on when we are already working on it as a full agenda item with a full report, not just a briefing note, a full report that supersedes a briefing note. It's already being worked on.
With respect, Chair, the briefing note contains information about cycling facilities that would make the Bermuda Bridge project safer than the current proposals, and the contract is about to be let with a construction firm, so I do think we need to discuss it before June.
With respect, Councillor Condacor, had I been involved in this process earlier, we would not be having this discussion in front of the world and his wife. The fact of the matter is that this briefing note was pushed on me at the last minute. It's not actually correct in its entirety. That's why I've shown it on screen to highlight there is an issue in there that's not correct. The author of the briefing note is not in to change the briefing note, so that's why I've highlighted it. The briefing note will be sent out after this meeting. We are having a full agenda item of the Bermuda Bridge at a future meeting, which is currently being worked on. So can we just accept that actually it's better to have it as a full agenda item than a briefing note? I think we can all agree that point.
Then, Chair, I'd like to call a full council meeting to discuss this.
If you get the relevant signatures, I'm sure you can do that. Do we have? Let me have a look who is actually on. Right, I'm minded to actually move on because I think it's been made very clear, unless there is any particular reason legally why I can't move on, I suspect I'm going to move on to number 9, which is urgent items. I'm not seeing any forthcoming legal advice to tell me that I can't move on. So I am going to move on. Thank you. So we are going to move on now to agenda item number 9, urgent items. I don't have anything that's been brought up to me personally prior to the meeting.
Chair, Councillor Holland's got his hand up. I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry, I can't see that.
It's just a small point. Going back to the beginning of the meeting with the announcement about the battery factory at Coventry Airport, I just wondered if I could clarify something, because my understanding from the news reports yesterday is that we're just putting a bid together where we're competing with other towns like Newcastle on Tyne. But the announcement at the start of our meeting now was as if this was a successful bid. And can we just clarify the status of this? Is it just something that we'd all like to do, working jointly with Coventry City Council, and we hope we can get this project going? Or is it actually approved that it will happen?
We've got Dave. Dave, can you offer any insight into this?
Yes, thanks, Chair. My understanding is that the City Council and their joint venture partner put in a planning application for the development of Gigafactory. That doesn't necessarily mean that an occupier for that Gigafactory has been secured. It's just that the planning application is put in. And there may have been, but I'm not privy to that discussion. What I know is that there is proposals for a number. I mean, there is a demand for a number of gigafactories. So I think there has been a talk that a gigafactory location and where it might go. But I think the general consensus is that to meet the demands of battery manufacturing across all the technologies going forward, there will need to be more than one gigafactory. So I don't think it's a sort of a binary competition between one location or another. I think over time there will be a number, and this is helping provide a location and the preferred location in the Midlands for a gigafactory. But yeah, I'm not aware that it's finalised. It's just the start of the process.
No, so okay. That's very helpful. Thank you. So it's an intention, not a decision, and you've got to start somewhere. This is the first. The planning application is a good start. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I can see you with your hand raised.
Yeah, not much to add to what Dave said. It's absolutely that. This is the intention to put forward the planning application between the one of the landowners in Coventry City Council to Warwick District Council. There's wide national support to do just that, rather than a decision on an end user and the factory as such. Early days, a long way to go.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Condacor, I can see your hand again.
Yeah. Chair, can I raise formally that we discuss the Bermuda Bridge project cycle lane as an item of any of the business, and request someone second me, please.
Chairman, I would not be prepared to second that. I don't think anybody else should. You've stated your points to him. He will not listen. He's got a bee in his bonnet, and he's not going to let go. I'm sorry to be so strict about this, but I think it's time that a senior officer had a word in somebody's ear. Thank you, Chair.
I don't see anyone seconded, so I'm moving on. We have concluded all of the business. As I say, I'm not don't have anything on urgent items, so I am going to call this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate everyone's time, and it's actually been quite an informative session. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Have a good evening.